One of these days I'll get a bookmark. Alright, Chapter 10, Strider. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. Sorry, I think parlor's a funny word. There was no light. Mary was not there, and the fire had burned low. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown on a couple of... He's killing me. We got 2 funny words in the first paragraph. I'm sorry, I was intending to start this little episode here off cool in honor of our boy. But no, we're gonna puff up the embers into a blaze and throw on a couple of faggots that they had discovered Strider had come with them. Yep. There he was, calmly sitting in a chair by the door. Love that for him. Hello, said Pippin. Who are you, and what do you want? I'm called Strider, he answered. And though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me. You and I might hear something to my advantage, I believe, said Frodo. What have you to say? Several things, answered Strider. But of course, I have my price. What do you mean? Asked Frodo sharply. Don't be alarmed, I just mean this. I will tell you what I know, and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward. This is only the second sip, I promise. So tonight we're having a lovely blackberry wine and laughing too hard at this. Where was I? And what will that be, pray? Said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal, and he thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly satisfy a rogue, and he could not spare any of it. No more than you can afford, answered Strider with a slow smile, as if he guessed Frodo's thoughts. Just this. You must take me along with you until I wish to leave you. Oh, indeed, replied Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business. Excellent, exclaimed Strider. I love him. I love him. I didn't remember this, but I have always loved him. Excellent, exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You have been much too careless so far. Very well, I will tell you what I know, and leave the reward to you. Why are you talking like this? I love it. You may be glad to grant it when you've heard me. Go on then, said Frodo. What do you know? Too much. Too many dark things, said Strider grimly. But as for your business... He got up and went to the door, opened it quickly, and looked out. Then he shut it quietly and sat down again. I have quick ears, he went on, lowering his voice. Though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen, if I wish. Now, I was behind the hedge this evening on the road west of Bree, when 4 hobbits came out of the downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil, or to one another, but one thing interests me. Please remember, said one of them, that the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. That interested me so much that I followed them here. I slipped over the gate just behind them. It was you? Oh my God. Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful. There's one little note that I'm not going to spoil for any of y'all right here, but it is cackling madly on my shoulder. I don't see what interest my name has for anyone in Bree, said Frodo angrily. And I shall have to learn why it interests you. Mr. Strider may have been an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. Well answered, said Strider, laughing. But the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit called Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly, and I learned that he was carrying out of the Shire, well, a secret that concerned me and my friends. Now, don't mistake me, he cried, as Frodo rose from his seat. Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care with the secret than you do, and care is needed. That's interesting. He leaned forward and looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday, one came down the Greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the Greenway from the south. There was a silence. At last Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us, he said, and the landlord seems to have heard something. Why did he press us to join the company? And why on earth did we behave so foolishly? I ought to have stayed quiet in here. It would have been better, said Strider. I would have stopped your going into the common room if I could, but the innkeeper would not let me in to see you, or take a message. Do you think he... began Frodo. No, I don't think any harm of old Butterbur. Only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of my sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have rather a rascally look, do I not? Said Strider, with a curl of his lip and a queer gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better. When we do, I hope you'll explain what happened at the end of your song. For that little prank, it was a sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now, at any rate, they seem to have missed me and have gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their number. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard. And there are some folk in Bree who are not to be trusted, he went on. Bill Ferny, for instance. He has an evil name in the Breeland, and queer folk call it his house. Hey, look, you're the one who came in earlier with two, not being of the male persuasion. I won't repeat it as a joke here, but you know. I lost my place. Sorry, got distracted. You must have noticed him among the company. A sneering fellow. He was very close with one of the southern strangers, and they slipped out together just after your accident. Not all those southerners mean well. And as for Ferny, he would sell anything to anybody, or make mischief for amusement. What will Ferny sell, and what has my accident got to do with him? Said Frodo, still determined not to understand Strider's hints. News of you, of course, answered Strider. An account of your performance would be very interesting to certain people. After that, they would hardly need to be told your real name. It seems to me only too likely that they will hear of it before this night is over. Is that enough? You can do as you like about my reward, take me as a guide or not. But I may say that I know all the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains, for I have wandered over them for many years. I am older than I look. Might prove useful. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree, and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible. The hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if in pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still, and the light seemed to have gotten dim. For a while he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking in distant memory, or listening to the sounds in the night far away. "There," he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. "Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough, yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape, if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him?" There was a heavy silence. Frodo made no answer. His mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master, and at last he broke out. "With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I say no. This Strider here, he warns and he says take care, and I say yes to that, and let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild. Oh, and let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like. But it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, as he puts it." Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but he turned his keen eyes on Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. "No," he said slowly. "I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business, and how do you know it?" "The lesson in caution has been well learned," said Strider with a grim smile. "But caution is one thing, and wavering is another. You will never get to Rivendell now on your own, and to trust me is your only chance. You must make up your mind. I will answer some of your questions, if that will help you to do so. But why should you believe my story, if you do not trust me already? Still, here it is." At that moment, there came a knock at the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. How edgy. "I've come to bid you good night," said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. "Nob, take the water to the rooms." He came in and shut the door. "It's like this," he began, hesitating and looking troubled. "If I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. But first one thing and then another this week have jogged my memory, as the saying goes. Not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, and for one of the name of Baggins in particular." "And what has that got to do with me?" asked Frodo. "Ah, you know best," said the landlord knowingly. "I won't give you away, but I was told that this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so." "Indeed? Let's have it then," said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. A stout little fellow with red cheeks," said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. "That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits." "Oh, sorry. That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me," continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. "But this one is taller than some and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin. Perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me." "He said it? And who was he?" asked Frodo eagerly. "Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. A wizard, they say he is. But he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me, if I see him again. Turn all my ale sour, or me into a block of wood, I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty. Still, what's done can't be undone." "Well, what have you done?" said Frodo, getting impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts. "Where was I?" said the landlord, pausing and snapping his fingers. "Ah, yes, old Gandalf. 3 months back, he walked right into my room without a knock. 'Barley,' he says, 'I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me? You've only to name it,' said I. I'm in a hurry, said he, and I've no time myself, but I want a message took to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send and trust to go? I can find someone, I said. Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after. Make it tomorrow, he says. And then he gave me a letter. It's addressed plain enough, said Mr. Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire. A letter for me from Gandalf, cried Frodo. Ah, said Mr. Butterbur, then your right name is Baggins? It is, said Frodo, and you had better give me that letter at once, and explain why you never sent it. That's what you came to tell me, I suppose, though you've taken a long time to come to the point. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked troubled. You're right, master, he said, and I beg your pardon. I'm a mortal afraid of what Gandalf will say, if harm comes of it, but I didn't keep it back a purpose. I put it by safe. Then I couldn't find nobody willing to go to the Shire next day, nor the day after. None of my own folk were to spare, and then one thing after another drove it out of my mind. I'm a busy man. I'll do what I can to set matters right. If there's any help I can give, you've only name it. Leaving the letter aside, I promised Gandalf no less, Barley. He says to me, this friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long, him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill. Mind that, but she need ask no questions. And if I'm not with him, he may be in trouble, and he may need help. Do whatever you can for him, and I'll be grateful, he says. And here you are, and trouble is not far off, seemingly. What do you mean? Asked Frodo. These Black Riders, said the landlord, lowering his voice. They're looking for Baggins, and if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering and the geese screaming. Uncanny, I called it. Nob, he came and told me that two men in black were at the door asking for a hobbit called Baggins. Nob's hair was all stood on end. I bid the fellows be off and slammed the door on them, but they've been asking the same question all the way to Archet, I hear. And that ranger, Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get in here to see you before you'd had a bite or sup, he did. He did, said Strider suddenly, coming forward into the light. And much trouble would have been saved if you had let him in, Barlaman. The landlord jumped with surprise. You! He cried. You're always popping up. What do you want now? He's here with my leave, said Frodo. He came to offer me his help. Well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider. A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day. Rude! They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the men in black off? I'm just going to have to keep saying it like that, y'all. Tolkien's going to get me canceled on Twitter. I'm not even on Twitter anymore. Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money, said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. But why can't you stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these queer goings-on? What are these men after? And where do they come from? I'd like to know. I'm sorry, I can't explain it all, answered Frodo. I'm tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you that you will be in danger as long as I'm in your house. These Black Riders, I'm not sure, but I fear they come from Mordor, said Strider in a low voice. From Mordor, Balaman, if that means anything to you. Save us, cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. That was the worst news that has come to Bree in my time. It is, said Frodo. Are you still willing to help me? I am, said Mr. Butterbur, more than ever, though I don't know what the likes of me can do against, he faltered. against the shadow in the east, said Strider quietly. Not much, Mr. Bartleman, but every little bit helps. You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight, as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name of Baggins till he is far away. I'll do that, said Butterbur. But they'll find out he's here without help from me, I'm afraid. It's a pity Mr. Baggins drew attention to himself this evening, to say no more. The story of that Mr. Bilbo's going off has been heard before here tonight in Bree. Even our Nob has been doing some guessing in his slow pate, and there are others in Bree quicker in the uptake than he is. Well, we can only hope that the riders won't come back yet, said Frodo. I hope not indeed, said Butterbur. Sorry, I need a pause to think here. We're just gonna go. They won't get into the pony so easily. Don't you worry till the morning, Nob will say no word. No man in black shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight. But you would best get some sleep if you can. In any case, we must be called at dawn, said Frodo. We must get off as early as possible. Breakfast at 6:30, please. Right. I'll see to the orders, said the landlord. Good night, Mr. Underhill, I should say. Good night, now. Bless me. Where's your Mr. Brennybuck? I don't know, said Frodo with sudden anxiety. They had forgotten all about Mary, and it was getting late. I'm afraid he's out. He said something about going for a breath of air. Well, do you want looking after, and no mistake? Your party might be on a holiday, said Mr. Butterbur. I must go and bar the doors quick, but I'll see your friend is let in when he comes. I'd better send Nob to look for him. Good night to you all. At last Mr. Butterbur went out. With another doubtful look at Strider and a shake of his head, his footsteps retreated down the passage. Of course he's friends with Gandalf. Y'all don't communicate, that's the problem. Well, no, yes, it is y'all. Gandalf at least attempted to send a letter, apparently. Y'all are friends with the same people. Strider and Butterbur and Bilbo and Baggins. I still blame Gandalf. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It seemed certainly to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message. The Prancing Pony, Bree, Mid-Year's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon, and get out of the Shire before the end of July at latest. I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you if I find that you are gone. Leave a message for me here, if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business, and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again, not for any reason whatsoever. Do not travel by night. And then there's Gandalf's G rune. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. And then he leaves us a beautiful poem. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Thing wanted, always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. And another big G rune. Frodo read the letter to himself, and then passed it to Pippin and Sam. Really, old Butterbur has made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had got this at once, we might have been safe in Rivendell by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He's been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me that you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me until now? Said Strider. I knew nothing of this letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs. If I was to help you, in any case, I did not intend to tell you about myself at once. I had to study you first, and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked. But I must admit, he added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me. Good evening, Groucho. If you weren't here for the beginning, and you want to laugh at me, laughing at our dear professor and what our dear professor is making me read, I highly recommend going and listening to the beginning. They are, at first at any rate, laughed Pippin, with sudden relief after reading Gandalf's letter. But handsome is as handsome does, as so we say in the Shire, and I dare say we shall all look much the same after lying for days in hedges and ditches. It would take much more than a few days or weeks or years of wandering in the wilds to make you look like Strider, he answered. And you would die first, unless you're made of sterner stuff than you look to be. Aww, Pippin subsided, but Sam was not daunted. He still eyed Strider dubiously. How do we know you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about? He demanded. You never mentioned Gandalf till this letter came out. You might be a play-acting spy. For all I can see, trying to get us to go with you. You might have done the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that? Strider! That you are a stout fellow, answered Strider. But I am afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. And I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now. Okay, I'm thinking stout was meant as a strange compliment coming from the professor, who has been nothing but judgmental of Sam so far. I think he was intending to say stout of mind, but it fits for body as well. We do love a stout king. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. There we go! There we go! What did I say? But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them, with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will. Dumbly. There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believe that you were a friend before the letter came, he said, or at least I wished to. You frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand. I see, laughed Strider. I look foul and feel fair, is that it? All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those that wander are lost. Did the verses apply to you, then? Asked Frodo. I could not make out what they were about, but how did you know that they were in Gandalf's letter, if you had never seen it? I did not know, he answered, but I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name. He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken a foot below the hilt. Not much use is it, Sam, said Strider, but the name is near when it shall be the time is near when it shall be forged anew. Sam said nothing. Well, said Strider, with Sam's permission, we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide. We shall have a rough road tomorrow, even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered. We can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed. But I should try to get lost as soon as possible. Yep, that's the sentence. That sounds like something I would say. I know one or two ways out of Breeland, other than the main road. Once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop. Weathertop, said Sam. What's that? It is a hill, just to the north of the road, about halfway from here to Rivendell. Commands a wide view all around, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point, if he follows us. After Weathertop, our journey will become more difficult, and we shall have to choose between various dangers. When did you last see Gandalf? Asked Frodo. Do you know where he is, or what he is doing? Strider looked grave. I do not know, he said. I came west with him in the spring. I have often kept watch on the borders of the Shire in the last few years, when he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. We last met the 1st of May at Sarn Ford down the Brandywine. He told me that his business with you had gone well, and that you would be starting for Rivendell in the last week of September. As I knew he was at your side, I went away for a journey of my own. And that has proved ill, for plainly some news reached him, and I was not at hand to help. I am very troubled for the first time since I have known him. We should have had messages, even if he could not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland. I have been watching the East Road anxiously. Do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean, asked Frodo. Do not know anything else that could have hindered him, except the enemy himself, said Strider. But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys, but this business of ours will be his greatest task. Pippin yawned. I'm sorry, he said, but I'm dead tired. In spite of all the danger and worry, I must go to bed, or sleep where I sit. Where is that silly Pharaoh, Merry? It would be the last straw if we had to go out in the dark to look for him. At that moment, they heard a door slam, then feet come running along the passage. Merry came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped. I have seen them, Frodo. I have seen them. Black Riders. Black Riders, cried Frodo. Where? Here, in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then, as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again and was standing just outside the light of the lamp, looking at the stars. Suddenly I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows across the road, and just beyond the edge of the lamplight. I slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse. I love that line for some reason. Which way did it go? Asked Strider, suddenly and sharply. Merry started, noticing the stranger for the first time. Go on, said Frodo. This is a friend of Gandalf's. I'll explain later. It seemed to make off up the road eastward, continued Merry. I tried to follow. Of course it vanished almost at once, but I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road. Strider looked at Merry with wonder. You have a stout heart, he said. It was foolish. I don't know, said Merry. Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. I seemed to be drawn somehow. Anyway, I went, and suddenly I heard voices by the hedge. One was muttering, The other was whispering or hissing. I couldn't hear a word that was said. I did not creep any closer because I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified, and I turned back and was just going to bolt home when something came behind me and I fell over. I found him, sir, put in Nob. Mr. Butterbur sent me out with a lantern. Went down to Westgate and then back up towards Southgate, just nigh Bill Ferny's house. I thought I could see something in the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if 2 men were stooping over something, lifting it. I gave a shout, but when I got up to the spot there was no sign of him, and only Mr. Brandybuck lying by the roadside. He seemed to be asleep. I thought I had fallen into deep water, he says to me when I shook him. Very queer he was. And as soon as I had roused him, he got up and ran back here like a hare. I'm afraid that's true, said Mary, though I don't know what I said. I had an ugly dream, which I can't remember. I went to pieces. I don't know what came over me. I do, said Strider. The Black Breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed back through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree. What will happen? Said Mary. Will they attack the inn? No, I think not, said Strider. They are not all here yet, and in any case, that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house where there are lights and many people, not until they are desperate, not while all the long leagues of Eridor still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and already some in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work, Ferny and some of the strangers, maybe, the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at Westgate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left him. We seem to have enemies all round, said Frodo. What are we to do? Stay here. Do not go to your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The Hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and the door. But first Nob and I will fetch your luggage. While Strider was gone, Frodo gave Mary a rapid account of all that had happened since supper. Mary was still reading and pondering Gandalf's letter when Strider and Nob returned. Well, masters, said Nob, I've ruffled up the clothes and put a bolster down the middle of each bed, and made a nice imitation of your head with a brown woolen mat. Mr. Underhill, sir, he said with a grin. Pippin laughed. Very lifelike, he said, but what will happen when they have penetrated the disguise? We shall see, said Strider. Let us hope to hold the fort till morning. Good night to you, said Nob, and went off to take his part in the watch on the doors. Their bags and gear they piled on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door and shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw that the night was still clear. The sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. There is an asterisk next to sickle that goes down to say the Hobbit's name for the plough, or Great Bear. He then closed and barred the heavy inside shutters and drew the curtains together. Strider built up the fire and blew out all the candles. The hobbits lay down on their blankets with their feet towards the hearth, but Strider settled himself in the chair against the door. They talked for a while, for Merry still had several questions to ask. Jumped over the moon, chuckled Merry as he rolled himself in his blanket. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it in 100 years hence. I hope so, said Strider. Then they all fell silent. One by one the hobbits dropped off to sleep. Oh boy. What a roller coaster. What a glass cage of emotions. Oh. Ugh. Oh my. Just checking how much is in the next chapter. Oh, God. We get to listen to Aragorn sing for 2 whole pages. Ooh. Okay. Chapter 11. A Knife in the Dark. As they prepped for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells and along the river bank. The house at Crick Hollow stood silent. Fatty Bulger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing on him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. He then shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate they stopped. Oh, excuse me. Perfect timing, huh? And 3 black figures entered, the shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door, one to the corner of the house on the other side, and there they stood, as still as the shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. "Open, in the name of Mordor," said a voice, thin and menacing. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back, with timbers burst and lock broken. The figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. "Awake! Fear! Fear! Foes, awake!" Fatty Bulger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shapes creep from the garden, he knew that he must run for it or perish. And run he did, out of the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house, more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no," he was crying. "No, not me. I haven't got it." It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, and some strange invasion from the old forest. And then they lost no more time. Fear, fire, foes. The brandybucks were blowing the horn call of Buckland that had not been sounded for 100 years, not since the white wolves came in the fell winter, when the brandywine was frozen over. "Awake! Awake!" Far away, answering horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane, the noise of hoofs broke out, and gathering to a gallop, went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crick Hollow, there was the sound of horns blowing, and voices crying, and feet running, but the black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile, they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty, and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. Ooh. In the early night, Frodo woke from deep sleep, suddenly, as if some sound or presence had disturbed him. He saw that Strider was sitting alert in his chair. His eyes gleamed in the light of a fire, which had been tended and was burning brightly, but he made no sign or movement. Frodo soon went to sleep again, but his dreams were again troubled with the noise of wind and of galloping hoofs. The wind seemed to be curling round the house and shaking it, and far off he heard a horn blowing wildly. He opened his eyes and heard a cock crowing lustily in the inn yard. Strider had drawn the curtains and pushed back the shutters with a clang. The first gray light of day was in the room, and a cold air was coming through the open window. As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad that they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. Strider immediately went to fetch the landlord. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked sleepy and frightened. He'd hardly closed his eyes all night, so he said, but he had never heard a sound. Neither did the hobbits, and they were the next door over, so... Never has such a thing happened in my time, he cried, raising his hands in horror. Guests unable to sleep in their beds, and good bolsters ruined and all. What are we coming to? Dark times, said Strider. But for the present you may be left in peace, when you have got rid of us. We will leave at once. Never mind about breakfast. A drink and a bite standing will have to do. We shall be packed in a few minutes. Mr. Butterbur hurried off to see that their ponies were got ready, and to fetch them a bite. But very soon he came back in dismay. The ponies had vanished. The stable doors had all been opened in the night, and they were gone, not only Mary's ponies, but every other horse and beast in the place. Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well set out for the moon. Strider sat silent for a while, looking at the hobbits, as if he was weighing up their strength and courage. Ponies would not help us escape horsemen, he said at last thoughtfully, as if he guessed what Frodo had in mind. We should not go much slower on foot, not on the roads I meant to take. I was going to walk in any case. It is the food and stores that trouble me. We cannot count on getting anything to eat between here and Rivendell, except what we take with us, and we ought to take plenty to spare, for we may be delayed, or forced to go roundabout, far out of the direct way. How much are you prepared to carry on your backs? As much as we must, said Pippin with a sinking heart, but trying to show that he was tougher than he looked or felt. I can carry enough for 2, said Sam defiantly. God, I love Sam. Can't anything be done, Mr. Butterbur? Asked Frodo. Can't we get a couple of ponies in the village? Or even one, just for the baggage? I don't suppose we could hire them, but we might be able to buy them, he said doubtfully, wondering if he could afford it. I doubt it, said the landlord unhappily. The 2 or 3 riding ponies that were in Bree were stabled in my yard, and they're gone. As for the other animals, horses or ponies for draught or what-not, there are very few of them in Bree, and they won't be for sale. But I'll do what I can. I'll rout out Bob and send him round as soon as may be. Yes, said Strider reluctantly. You'd better do that, but I'm afraid we shall have to try to get 1 pony at least. But so ends all hope of starting early and slipping away quietly. We might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure. That was part of their plan, no doubt. There is 1 crumb of comfort, said Mary, and more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait, and sit down to it. Let's get a hold of Nob. I love Mary, too. In the end, there was more than 3 hours delay. That's a nice long breakfast. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. In the end, there was... Oh, I already said that. 3 hours delay. I'm hungry, guys. Look, it's been a day. Bob came back with the report that no horse or pony was to be got for love of money in the neighborhood, except one. Bill Ferny had one that he might possibly sell. A poor old half-starved creature it is, said Bob, but he won't part with it for less than thrice its worth, seeing it's at your place. Not if I knows Bill Ferny. Bill Ferny, cried Frodo. Isn't there some trick? Wouldn't the beast bolt back to him with all our stuff, or help in tracking us, or something? I wonder, said Strider. But I cannot imagine any animal running home to him, once it got away. I fancy this is only an afterthought of kind Master Ferny's, just a way of increasing his profits from the affair. The chief danger is that the poor beast is probably at death's door, but there does not seem any choice. What does he want for it? Bill Ferny's price was 12 silver pennies, and that was indeed at least 3 times the pony's value in those parts. It proved to be a bony, underfed, and dispirited animal, but it did not look like dying just yet. Mr. Butterbur paid for it himself, and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. He was an honest man, and well off as things were reckoned in Bree, but 30 silver pennies was a sore blow to him, and being cheated by Bill Ferny made it harder to bear. As a matter of fact, he came out on the right side in the end. It turned out later that only one horse had been actually stolen. The others had been driven off, or had bolted in terror, and were found wandering in different corners of the Breeland. Mary's ponies had escaped altogether, and eventually, having a good deal of sense, they made their way to the downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. So they came under the care of Tom Bombadil for a while, and were well off. But when news of the events in Bree came to Tom's ears, he sent them to Mr. Butterbur, who thus got 5 good beasts at a very fair price. They had to work harder in Bree, but Bob treated them well, so on the whole they were lucky. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never came to Rivendell. Look at that. The ponies didn't die. Good evening, True. However, in the meanwhile, for all Mr. Butterbur knew, his money was gone for good, or for bad. And he had other troubles, for there was a great commotion as soon as the remaining guests were astir and heard news of the raid on the inn. The southern travelers had lost several horses and blamed the innkeeper loudly, until it became known that one of their own number had also disappeared in the night, none other than Bill Ferny's companion. Suspicion fell on him at once. "If you pick up with a horse thief and bring him to my house," said Mr. Butterbur angrily, "you ought to pay for all the damages yourselves, and not come shouting at me. Go and ask Ferny where your handsome friend is." But it appeared that he was nobody's friend, and nobody could recollect when he had joined their party. Good one, Groucho. After their breakfast, the hobbits had to repack and get together further supplies for the longer journey that they were now expecting. It was close to 10 o'clock before they at last got off. By that time, the whole of Bree was buzzing with excitement. Frodo's vanishing trick, the appearance of the Black Horseman, the robbing of the stables, and not least the news that Strider the Ranger had joined the mysterious hobbits, made such a tale as would last for many uneventful years. Most of the inhabitants of Bree and Staddle, and many even from Combe and Archet, were crowded in the road to see the travelers start. The other guests of the inn were at the doors or hanging out of the windows. Strider had changed his mind, and he had decided to leave Bree by the main road. Any attempt to set off across country at once would only make matters worse. Half the inhabitants would follow them to see what they were up to, and to prevent them from trespassing. They said farewell to Nob and Bob, and took leave of Mr. Butterbur with many thanks. "I hope we shall meet again some day, when things are merry once more," said Frodo. "I should like nothing better than to stay in your house in peace for a while." They tramped off, anxious and downhearted, under the eyes of the crowd. Not all the faces were friendly, nor all the words that were shouted. But Strider seemed to be held in awe by most of the Breelanders, and those that he stared at shut their mouths and drew away. Excuse me. He walked in front with Frodo. Next came Merry and Pippin, and last came Sam leading the pony, which was laden with as much of their baggage as they had the heart to give it. But already it looked less dejected, as if it approved of the change in its fortunes. Sam was chewing an apple thoughtfully. He had a pocket full of them, a parting present from Nob and Bob. "Apples for walking, and a pipe for sitting," he said. "But I'll reckon I'll miss them both before long." The hobbits took no notice of the inquisitive heads that peeped out of the doors, or popped over walls and fences as they passed. But as they drew near to the further gate, Frodo saw a dark, ill-kept house behind a thick hedge, the last house in the village. In one of the windows he caught a glimpse of a sallow face with sly eyes, but had vanished at once. I gotta admit, I'm skipping a handful of words here and there because this book was written in the 1930s, and Tolkien definitely professed his issues with certain types of people later on in his life. I just wanted to give a little forewarning for anybody who is reading along. I don't expect y'all to be reading along. Why else would you be here listening to me ramble and drink wine? Anyway, so that's where that southerner is hiding, he thought. It's a rude comment, but I'll read it. He looks more than half like a goblin, which I feel could be said of many people. You know, it's the ears. Over the hedge, another man was staring boldly. He had heavy, dark brows and dark, scornful eyes, and his large mouth curled in a sneer. He was smoking a short black pipe. As they approached, he took it out of his mouth and spat. "Mornin', Longshanks," he said. "Off early. Found some friends at last." Strider nodded, but did not answer. "Mornin', my little friends," he said to the others. "That is just so cruel. Why did I read it like that? Suppose you know who you've taken up with. That stick-it-not Strider, that is. Though I've heard other names not so pretty. Watch out tonight, and you, Sammy. Don't go ill-treating my poor old pony." Pah, he spat again. Sam turned quickly. "And you, Fernie," he said. "Put your ugly face out of sight, or it'll get hurt." With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. He ducked too late, and curses came from behind the hedge. "Waste of a good apple," said Sam regretfully, and strode on. At last they left the village behind. The escort of children and stragglers that had followed them got tired and turned back at the south gate. Passing through, they kept on along the road for some miles. It bent to the left, curving back into its eastward line as it rounded the feet of Bree Hill, and then it began to run swiftly downward into wooded country. To their left, they could see some of the houses and hobbit holes of Staddle on the gentler southeastern slopes of the hill. Down in a deep hollow, away north of the road, there were wisps of rising smoke that showed where Combe lay. Archet was hidden in the trees beyond. After the road had run down some way, and had left Bree Hill standing tall and brown behind, they came on a narrow track that led off towards the north. "This is where we leave the open and take cover," said Strider. "Not a shortcut, I hope," said Pippin. "Our last cut through woods nearly ended in disaster." "Ah, but you had not got me with you then," laughed Strider. "My cuts, short or long, don't go wrong." He took a look up and down the road. No one was in sight, and he led the way quickly down towards the wooded valley. His plan, as far as they could understand it without knowing the country, was to go towards Archet at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then steer as straight as he could over the wild lands to Weathertop Hill. In that way, they would, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further bent southwards to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But of course, they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. Neither is their name, not gonna lie. However, in the meanwhile, walking was not unpleasant. Indeed, if it had not been for the disturbing events of the night before, they would have enjoyed this part of the journey better than any up to that time. The sun was shining, clear but not too hot. The woods in the valley were still leafy and full of color, and seemed peaceful and wholesome. Strider guided them confidently among the many paths. Although left to themselves, they would soon have been at a loss. He was taking a wandering course with many turns and doublings to put off any pursuit. Bill Fernie will have watched where we left the road for certain, he said, though I don't think he will follow us himself. He knows the land round here well enough, but he knows he is not a match for me in a wood. It is what he may tell others that I am afraid of. I don't suppose they are far away. If they think we have made for Archet, so much the better. Whether because of Strider's skill, or for some other reason, they saw no sign and heard no sound of any other living thing all that day, neither 2-footed, except birds, nor 4-footed, except one fox and a few squirrels. The next day, they began to steer a steady course eastwards, and still all was quiet and peaceful. On the third day out from Bree, they came out from the Chetwood. The land had been falling steadily, ever since they turned aside from the road, and now they entered a wide, flat expanse of country, much more difficult to manage. They were far beyond the borders of the Bree land, out in the pathless wilderness, and drawing near to the Midgewater marshes. The ground now became damp, and in places boggy, and here and there they came upon pools, and wide stretches of reeds and rushes filled with the warbling of little hidden birds. They had to pick their way carefully to keep both dry-footed and on their proper course. At first they made fair progress, but as they went on, their passage became slower and more dangerous. The marshes were bewildering and treacherous, and there was no permanent trail even for rangers to find through their shifting quagmires. The flies began to torment them, and the air was full of clouds of tiny midges that crept up their sleeves and breeches and into their hair. "I'm being eaten alive," cried Pippin. "Midgewater. They're more midges than water." "What do they live on when they can't get hobbit?" asked Sam, scratching his neck. "God, it's making me itch. They spent a miserable day in this lonely and unpleasant country. Their camping place was damp, cold, and uncomfortable, and the biting insects would not let them sleep. There were also abominable creatures haunting the reeds and tussocks that, from the sound of them, were evil relatives of the cricket. What? There were thousands of them, and they squeaked all around. Neek, breek, neek, breek, neek, unceasingly all the night until the hobbits were nearly frantic. Okay. The next day, the 4th, was little better, and the night almost as comfortless. Though the Neeker-Breakers, as Sam called them, had been left behind, the midges still pursued them. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eye, I'm going to have to do this to my players at some point. Attack them with, like eldritch crickets or something. It's too weird not to. Okay. End distraction. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. It was not the dawn, for that was still some hours off. "What is the light?" he said to Strider, who had risen and was standing, gazing ahead into the night. "Do not know," Strider answered. "It is too distant to make out. It is like lightning that leaps up from the hilltops." Frodo lay down again, but for a while he could still see the white flashes, and against them the tall dark figure of Strider standing silent and watchful. At last he passed into uneasy sleep. I wonder if we're gonna get a clue as to what that was. Because we've already had Sam dreaming of Gandalf in trouble. Maybe that was a premonition instead of, currently happening? I don't know. I don't think Tolkien would describe Sauron as, a light, bright light. I don't know. Sounds creepy, though. They had not gone far on the 5th day when they left the last straggling pools and reed beds of the marshes behind them. The land before them began steadily to rise again. Away in the distance eastward, they could now see a line of hills. The highest of them was at the right of the line and a little separated from the others. It had a conical top, slightly flattened at the summit. "That is Weathertop," said Strider. "The old road, which we have left far away on our right, runs to the south of it and passes not far from its foot. We might reach it by noon tomorrow, if we go straight towards it. I suppose we had better do so." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo. "I mean, when we do get there, it is not certain what we shall find. It is close to the road. But surely we were hoping to find Gandalf there." "Yes, but the hope is faint." "Oh, no, it wouldn't have been Gandalf signaling. We know where he is, silly. If he comes this way at all, he may not pass through Bree, and so he may not know what we are doing. And anyway, unless by luck we arrive almost together, we shall miss one another, and it will not be safe for him or us to wait there long. If the riders fail to find us in the wilderness, they are likely to make for Weathertop themselves. It commands a wide view of all around. Indeed, there are many birds and beasts in this country that could see us, as we stand here, from that hilltop. Not all the birds are to be trusted, and there are other spies more evil than they are. The owls are not what they seem. Guys, I'm extra transformative tonight. The hobbits looked anxiously at the distant hills. Sam looked up into the pale sky, fearing to see hawks or eagles hovering over them with bright, unfriendly eyes. "You do make me feel uncomfortable and lonesome, Strider," he said. "What do you advise us to do?" asked Frodo. "I think," answered Strider slowly, as if he was not quite sure, "I think the best thing is to go as straight eastward from here as we can, to make for the line of hills, not for Weathertop. There we can strike a path I know that runs at their feet. It will bring us to Weathertop from the north, and less openly. Then we shall see what we shall see." All that day they plodded along, until the cold and early evening came down. The land became drier and more barren, but mists and vapors lay behind them on the marshes. A few melancholy birds were piping and wailing, until the round red sun sank slowly into the western shadows. Then an empty silence fell. The hobbits thought of the soft light of sunset glancing through the cheerful windows of Bag End far away. At the day's end, they came to a stream that wandered down from the hills to lose itself in the stagnant marshland, and they went up along its banks while the light lasted. It was already night when at last they halted and made their camp under some stunted alder trees by the shores of the stream. Ahead there loomed now against the dusky sky the bleak and treeless backs of the hills. That night they set a watch, and Strider, it seemed, did not sleep at all. The moon was waxing, and in the early night hours a cold gray light lay on the land. Next morning they set out again after sunrise. There was a frost in the air, and the sky was a pale clear blue. The hobbits felt refreshed, as if they had a night of unbroken sleep. Already they were getting used to much walking on short commons, shorter at any rate than what in the Shire they would have thought barely enough to keep them on their legs. Pippin declared that Frodo was looking twice the hobbit that he had been. "Very odd," said Frodo, tightening his belt, "considering that there is actually a good deal less of me. I hope the thinning process will not go on indefinitely, or I shall become a wraith." "Do not speak of such things," said Strider quickly, and with surprising earnestness. The hills drew nearer. They made an undulating ridge, often rising almost to 1,000 feet, and here and there falling again to low clefts or passes leading into the eastern land beyond. Along the crest on the ridge, the hobbits could see what looked to be the remains of green-grown walls and dikes. And in the clefts, there still stood the ruins of old works of stone. By night they had reached the feet of the westward slopes, and there they camped. It was the night of the 5th of October, and they were 6 days out from Bree. In the morning they found, for the first time since they had left Chetwood, a track plain to see. They turned right and followed it southwards. It ran cunningly, taking a line that seemed chosen so as to keep as much hidden as possible from the view, both of the hilltops above and of the flats to the west. It dived into dells and hugged steep banks, and where it passed over flatter and more open ground on either side of it, there were lines of large boulders and hewn stones that screened the travelers almost like a hedge. "I wondered who made this path, and what for," said Mary, as they walked along one of these avenues, where the stones were unusually large and closely set. "I'm not sure that I like it. It has a rather barrow-whitish look. Is there any barrow on Weathertop?" "No, there is no barrow on Weathertop, nor on any of these hills," answered Strider. "The men of the West did not live here, though in their latter days they defended the hills for a while against the evil that came out of Angmar. This path was made to serve the forts along the walls, but long before, in the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amonsul, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing stands of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It was told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west, in the days of the last alliance." The hobbits gazed at Strider. It seemed that he was learned in old lore, as well as in the ways of the wild. "Who was Gil-galad?" asked Mary. But Strider did not answer. He seemed to be lost in thought. Suddenly, a low voice murmured, "Gil-galad was an elven king. Of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for in the darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are." The others turned in amazement, for the voice was Sam's. "Good night, Groucho." "Don't stop," said Mary. That's all I know," stammered Sam, blushing. "I learned it from Mr. Bilbo when I was a lad. He used to tell me tales like that, knowing how I was always one for hearing about elves. It was Mr. Bilbo as taught me my letters. He was mighty book-learned, was dear old Mr. Bilbo. And he wrote poetry. He wrote what I have just said." "He did not make it up," said Strider. "It is part of the lay that is called The Fall of Gil-galad, which is in an ancient tongue. Bilbo must have translated it. I never knew that." "There was a lot more, said Sam. "All about Mordor. I didn't learn that part. It just gave me the shivers. I never thought I should be going that way myself." "Going to Mordor," cried Pippin. "I hope it won't come to that." "Do not speak that name so loudly," said Strider. Foreshadowing. I wish I had access to memes or something. No, it's bad enough as it is. Because I've had, for the last 3 pages playing in the back of my head, the Tom Cardy song, Walk, 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 Walk. That's just what we've been listening to, which is adorable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Or I wouldn't be reading it, It was already midday when they drew near the southern end of the path, and saw before them, in the pale, clear light of the October sun, a gray-green bank leading up like a bridge onto the northward slope of the hill. They decided to make for the top at once, while the daylight was broad. Concealment was no longer possible, and they could only hope that no enemy or spy was observing them. Nothing was to be seen moving on the hill. If Gandalf was anywhere about, there was no sign of him. On the western flank of Weathertop, they found a sheltered hollow, at the bottom of which there was a bowl-shaped dell with grassy sides. There they left Sam and Pippin with the pony and their packs and luggage. The other three went on. After half an hour's plodding climb, Strider reached the crown of the hill. Frodo and Merry followed, tired and breathless. The last slope had been steep and rocky. On the top they found, as Strider had said, a wide ring of ancient stonework, now crumbling or covered with age-long grass. But in the center, a cairn of broken stones had been piled. They were blackened, as if with fire. About them the turf was burned to the roots, and all within the ring the grass was scorched and shriveled, as if flames had swept the hilltop. But there was no sign of any living thing. Oh, how queer! Standing upon the rim of the ruined circle, they saw all around, below them, a wide prospect, for the most part of lands empty and featureless, except for patches of woodland away to the south, beyond which they caught here and there the glint of distant water. Beneath them, on this southern side, there ran like a ribbon the old road, coming out of the west and winding up and down until it faded behind a ridge of dark land to the east. Nothing was moving on it. Following its line eastward with their eyes, they saw the mountains. The nearer foothills were brown and somber. Behind them stood taller shapes of gray. Behind those again were high white peaks glimmering among the clouds. "Well, here we are," said Merry, "and very cheerless and uninviting it looks. There's no water and no shelter, and no sign of Gandalf. But I don't blame him for not waiting if he ever came here." "I wonder," said Strider, looking round thoughtfully. "Even if he was a day or two behind us at Bree, he could have arrived here first. He can ride very swiftly when need presses." Suddenly he stooped and looked at the stone on top of the cairn. It was flatter than the others, and whiter, as if it had escaped the fire. He picked it up and examined it, turning it in his fingers. "This has been handled recently," he said. "What do you think of these marks?" On the flat underside, Frodo saw some scratches. "There seems to be a stroke, a dot, and 3 more strokes," he said. "The stroke on the left might be a G rune with thin branches," said Strider. "Might be a sign left by Gandalf, though one cannot be sure. The scratches are fine, and they certainly look fresh, but the marks might mean something quite different and have nothing to do with us. Rangers use runes, and they come here sometimes." "What could they mean, even if Gandalf made them?" asked Merry. "I should say," answered Strider, "they stood for G3, and were a sign that Gandalf was here on October the 3rd. That is 3 days ago now. It would also show that he was in a hurry and danger was at hand, so that he had no time, or did not dare to write anything longer or plainer. If that is so, we must be wary." "I wish we could feel sure that he made the marks, whatever they mean," said Frodo. "It would be a great comfort to know that he was on the way, in front of us or behind us." "Perhaps," said Strider. "For myself, I believe that he was here, and was in danger. There have been scorching flames here, and now the light that we saw 3 nights ago in the eastern sky comes back to my mind. I guess that he was attacked on this hilltop, but with what results I cannot tell. He is here no longer, and we must now look after ourselves, and make our own way to Rivendell, as best we can." "How far is Rivendell?" asked Merry, gazing round wearily. The world looked wild and wide from Weathertop. "I don't know if the road has ever been measured in miles beyond the Forsaken Inn. A day's journey east of Bree," answered Strider. "Some say it is so far, and some say otherwise. It is a strange road, and folk are glad to reach their journey's end, whether the time is long or short. But I know how long it would take me on my own feet, with fair weather and no ill fortune. 12 days from here to the ford of Bruinen, yeah, I said it right, where the road crosses the Loudwater that runs out of Rivendell. We have at least a fortnight's journey before us, for I do not think we shall be able to use the road. Fortnight, said Frodo. A lot may happen in that time. It may, said Strider. They stood for a while silent on the hilltop, near its southward edge. In that lonely place, Frodo, for the first time, fully realized his homelessness and danger. He wished bitterly that his fortune had left him in the quiet and beloved Shire. He stared down at the hateful road, leading back westward to his home. Suddenly he was aware that 2 black specks were moving slowly along it, going westward, and looking again he saw that 3 others were creeping eastward to meet them. He gave a cry and clutched Strider's arm. Look, he said, pointing downwards. At once Strider flung himself on the ground behind the ruined circle, pulling Frodo down beside him. Merry threw himself alongside. What is it? He whispered. I do not know, but I fear the worst, answered Strider. Slowly they crawled up the edge of the ring again, and peered through a cleft between 2 jagged stones. The light was no longer bright, for the clear morning had faded, and clouds creeping out of the east had now overtaken the sun as it began to go down. They could all see the black specks, but neither Frodo nor Merry could make out their shapes for certain. Yet something told them that there, far below, were black riders assembling on the road beyond the foot of the hill. Yes, said Strider, whose keener sight left him no doubt. The enemy is here. Hastily they crept away and slipped down the north side of the hill to find their companions. Uh-oh. Sam and Peregrine had not been idle. They had explored a small dell in the surrounding slopes. Not far away they found a spring of clear water in the hillside, and near it footprints not more than a day or 2 old. In the dell itself they found recent traces of a fire and other signs of a hasty camp. There were some fallen rocks in the edge of the dell nearest to the hill. Behind them, Sam came upon a small store of firewood neatly stacked. I wonder if old Gandalf has been here, he said to Pippin. Whoever it was put this stuff here meant to come back, it seems. Strider was greatly interested in these discoveries. I wish I had waited and explored the ground down here myself, he said, hurrying off to the spring to examine the footprints. It is just as I feared, he said, when he came back. Sam and Pippin have trampled the soft ground, and the marks are spoilt or confused. Rangers have been here lately. It is they who left the firewood behind. But there are also several newer tracks that were not made by rangers. At least one set was made, only a day or 2 ago, by heavy boots. At least one. I cannot now be certain, but I think there were many booted feet. He paused and stood in anxious thought. Each of the hobbits saw in his mind a vision of the cloaked and booted riders, with the boots again. If y'all remember from their introduction, my fascination with the wraiths, ghostly, ethereal beings wearing heavy boots, leaving footprints and making campsites now they are. If the horsemen had already found the dell, the sooner Strider led them somewhere else, the better. Sam viewed the hollow with great dislike, now that he had heard news of their enemies on the road only a few miles away. Hadn't we better clear out quick, Mr. Strider? He asked impatiently. It is getting late, and I don't like this hole. It makes my heart sink somehow. Yes, we certainly must decide what to do at once, answered Strider, looking up and considering the time and the weather. Well, Sam, he said at last, I do not like this place either, but I cannot think of anywhere better that we could reach by nightfall. At least we are out of sight for the moment. If we moved, we should be much more likely to be seen by spies. All we could do would be to go right out of our way back north, on this side of the line of hills where the land is all much the same as it is here. The road is watched, but we should have to cross it if we try to take cover in the thickets way to the south. On the north side of the road, beyond the hills, the country is bare and flat for miles. "Can the riders see?" asked Mary. "I mean, they seem usually to have used their noses rather than their eyes, smelling for us, if smelling is the right word, at least in the daylight. But you made us lie down flat when you saw them, down below. And now you talk of being seen if we move." "I was too careless at the hilltop," answered Strider. "I was very anxious to find some sign of Gandalf, but it was a mistake for 3 of us to go up top and stand there so long, for the black horses can see, and the riders can use men and other creatures as spies, as we found at Bree. They themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys, and in the dark they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. Then they are most to be feared. And at all times they smell the blood of living things, desiring and hating it. Senses, too, there are other than sight or smell. We can feel their presence. It troubled our hearts as soon as we came here. And before we saw them, they feel ours more keenly. Also," he added, his voice sank to a whisper, "the ring draws them." "Is there no escape, then?" said Frodo, looking round wildly. "If I move, I shall be seen and hunted. If I stay, I shall draw them to me." Strider laid his hand on his shoulder. "There is still hope," he said. "You are not alone. Let us take this wood that is already set for the fire as a sign. There is little shelter or defense here, but fire shall serve for both. Sauron can put fire to his evil uses, as he can all things, but these riders do not love it, and fear those who wield it. Fire is our friend in the wilderness." "Maybe," muttered Sam. "It is also as good as a way of saying, 'Here we are,' as I can think of, bar shouting." I really enjoyed that one, that discussion of how the wraiths see things. That's very interesting. But still with the boots. Yeah. Down in the lowest and most sheltered corner of the dell they lit a fire and prepared a meal. The shades of evening began to fall, and it grew cold. They were suddenly aware of great hunger, for they had not eaten anything since breakfast, but they dared not make more than a frugal supper. The lands ahead were empty of all save birds and beasts, unfriendly places deserted by all the races of the world. Rangers passed at times beyond the hills, but they were few and they did not stay. Other wanderers were rare, and of evil sort. Trolls might stray down at times, out of the northern valleys of the Misty Mountains. Only on the road would travelers be found, most often dwarves, hurrying along on business of their own, and with no help and few words to spare for strangers. "I don't see how our food can be made to last," said Frodo. "We've been careful enough in the last few days, and this supper is no feast. But we have used more than we ought, if we have 2 weeks still to go, and perhaps more." "There is food in the world," said Strider, "berry, root, and herb, and I have some skill as a hunter at need. You need not be afraid of starving before winter comes, but gathering and catching food is long and weary work, and we need haste. So tighten your belts and think of hope with the tables of Elrond's house." The cold increased as darkness came on. Peering out from the edge of the dell, they could see nothing but a gray land now vanishing quickly into shadow. The sky above had cleared again, and was slowly filled with twinkling stars. Frodo and his companions huddled round the fire, wrapped in every garment and blanket they possessed, but Strider was content with a single cloak, and sat a little apart, drawing thoughtfully at his pipe. As night fell, and the light of the fire began to shine out brightly, he began to tell them tales to keep their minds from fear. He knew many great histories and legends of long ago, of elves and men, and the good and evil deeds of the elder days. They wondered how old he was, and where he'd learned all this lore. "Tell us of Gil-galad," said Merry suddenly, when he paused at the end of a story of the elf kingdoms. Do you know any more of that old lay that you spoke of? I do indeed, answered Strider. So also does Frodo, for it concerns us closely. Merry and Pippin looked at Frodo, who was staring into the fire. I know only of the little that Gandalf has told me, said Frodo slowly. Gil-galad was the last of the great elf kings of Middle-earth. Gil-galad is starlight in their tongue. With Elendil, the elf friend, he went to the land of... No, said Strider, interrupting. I do not think that tale should be told now with the servants of the enemy at hand. If we win through to the house of Elrond, you may hear it there, told in full. Then tell us some other tales of the old days, begged Sam. A tale about elves before the fading time. I would dearly like to hear more about elves. The dark seems to press round so close. Here we go. I will tell you the tale of Tinuviel, said Strider, in brief, for it is a long tale of which the end is not known, and there are none now except Elrond that remember it aright, as it was told of old. It is a fair tale, though it is sad, and as are all the tales of Middle-earth, and yet it may lift up your hearts. Yeah, that's a good description of the tales of Middle-earth, of which one we are reading. He was silent for some time, and then he began to speak. Not to speak, but to chant softly. I don't know the chant, so I'm just gonna have to speak. Oh shit, I think I do know the chant. Nope. The leaves were long, the grass was green, the hemlock umbels tall and fair, and in the glade a light was seen, of stars and shadow shimmering. Tinuviel was dancing there, to music of a pipe unseen, and light of stars was in her hair, and in her raiment glittering. There Beren came from the mountains cold, and lost he wandered under leaves. And where the elven river rolled, he walked alone and sorrowing. He peered between the hemlock leaves, and saw in wonder flowers of gold upon her mantle and her sleeves, and her hair like shadow following. Enchantment healed his weary feet, that over hills were doomed to roam, and forth he hastened strong and fleet, and grasped at moonbeams glistening. Through woven woods in Elvenhome she lightly fled on dancing feet, and left him lonely still to roam in the silent forest listening. He heard there oft the flying sound of feet as light as linden leaves, or music welling underground in hidden hollows quavering. Now withered lay the hemlock sheaths, and one by one, with sighing sound, whispering fell the beechen leaves, in the wintry woodland wavering. He sought her ever, wandering far, where leaves of years were thickly strewn, by light of moon and ray of star, in frosty heavens shivering. Her mantle glinted in the moon, as on a hilltop high and far she danced, and at her feet was strewn a mist of silver quivering. When winter passed, she came again, and her song released the sudden spring, like rising lark and falling rain and melting water bubbling. He saw the elven flowers spring about her feet, and healed again. He longed by her to dance and sing upon the grass untroubling. Again she fled, but swift he came. Tinuviel, Tinuviel. He called her by her elvish name, and there she halted listening. One moment stood she, and a spell his voice laid on her. Beren came, and doom fell on Tinuviel, that in his arms lay glistening. As Beren looked into her eyes, within the shadows of her hair, the trembling starlight of the skies, he saw there mirrored shimmering Tinuviel the elven fair, immortal maiden, elven wise. About him cast her shadowy hair, and arms like silver glimmering. Long was the way that fate them bore, o'er stony mountains cold and gray, through halls of iron and darkling door, and woods of nightshade morrowless. The sundering seas between them lay, And yet at last they met once more, and long ago they passed away in the forest singing sorrowless. Strider sighed and paused before he spoke again. "That is a song," he said, "in the mode that is called Anthanath among the elves. It is hard to render in our common speech, and this is but a rough echo of it. It tells of the meeting of Beren, son of Barahir, and Luthien Tinuviel. Beren was a mortal man, but Luthien was the daughter of Thingol, a king of elves upon Middle-earth when the world was young, and she was the fairest maiden that has ever been among all the children of this world. As the stars above the mists of the northern lands was her loveliness, and in her face was a shining light. In those days the great enemy, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant, dwelt in Angband. Angband. Angband? That sounds weird. Angband in the north. And the elves of the west, coming back to Middle-earth, made war upon him to regain the Silmarils, which he had stolen. And the fathers of men aided the elves. But the enemy was victorious, and Barahir was slain. And Beren, escaping through great peril, came over the mountains of terror into the hidden kingdom of Thingol, in the forest of Neldareth. There he beheld Luthien singing and dancing in a glade beside the enchanted river Esgaldwin, and he named her Tinuviel, that is, nightingale, in the language of old. Many sorrows befell them afterwards, and they were parted long. Tinuviel rescued Beren from the dungeons of Sauron, and together they passed through great dangers, and cast down even the great enemy from his throne, and took from his iron crown one of the 3 Silmarils, brightest of all jewels, to be the bride piece of Luthien to Thingol her father. Yet at the last Beren was slain by the wolf that came from the gates of Angband, and he died in the arms of Tinuviel. But she chose mortality, and to die from the world, so that she might follow him, and it is sung that they met again beyond the sundering seas, and after a brief time walking alive once more in the green woods together, they passed, long ago, beyond the confines of this world. So it is that Luthien Tinuviel, alone of the elf kindred, has died indeed and left the world, and they have lost her whom they most loved. But from her the lineage of the elf lords of old descended among men. There live still those whom Luthien was the foremother, and it is said that her line shall never fail. Elrond of Rivendell is of that kin, for of Beren and Luthien was born Dior Thingol's heir, and of him Elwing the White, whom Eärendil wedded. He that sailed his ship out of the mists of the world into the seas of heaven with the Silmaril upon his brow. And of Eärendil came the kings of Númenor, that is Westernesse. As Strider was speaking, they watched his strange, eager face, dimly lit in the red glow of the wood fire. His eyes shone, and his voice was rich and deep. Above him was a black, starry sky. Suddenly a pale light appeared over the crown of Weathertop behind him. The waxing moon was climbing slowly above the hill that overshadowed them, and the stars above the hilltop faded. The story ended. The hobbits moved and stretched. "Look," said Merry, "the moon is rising. It must be getting late." The others looked up. Even as they did so, they saw on top of the hill something small and dark against the glimmer of the moonrise. It was perhaps only a large stone or a jutting rock shown up by the pale light. Sam and Merry got up and walked away from the fire. Frodo and Pippin remained seated in silence. Strider was watching the moonlight on the hill intently. All seemed quiet and still, but Frodo felt a cold dread creeping over his heart now that Strider was no longer speaking. He huddled closer to the fire. That moment Sam came running back from the edge of the dell. "I don't know what it is," he said, "but I suddenly felt afraid. I daren't go outside this dell for any money. I felt that something was creeping up the slope." "Did you see anything?" asked Frodo, springing to his feet. "No, sir, I saw nothing, but I didn't stop to look." I saw something, said Mary. Or I thought I did. Away westwards where the moonlight was falling on the flats beyond the shadow of the hilltops. I thought there were 2 or 3 black shapes. They seemed to be moving this way. Keep close to the fire with your faces outward, cried Strider. Get some of the longer sticks ready in your hands. For a breathless time they sat there, silent and alert, with their backs turned to the wood fire, each gazing into the shadows that encircled them. Nothing happened. There was no sound or movement in the night. Frodo stirred, feeling that he must break the silence. He longed to shout out loud. Hush, whispered Strider. What's that? Gasped Pippin, at the same moment. Over the lip of the little dell, on the side away from the hill, they felt, rather than saw, a shadow rise. One shadow, or more than one. They strained their eyes, and the shadow seemed to grow. Soon there could be no doubt. 3 or 4 tall black figures were standing there on the slope, looking down on them. So black were they that they seemed like black holes in the deep shade behind them. Frodo thought that he heard a faint hiss as of venomous breath, and felt a thin, piercing chill. Then the shapes slowly advanced. Terror overcame Pippin and Merry, and they threw themselves flat on the ground. Sam shrank to Frodo's side. Frodo was hardly less terrified than his companions. He was quaking as if he was bitter cold, but his terror was swallowed up in a sudden temptation to put on the ring. The desire to do this laid hold of him, and he could think of nothing else. He did not forget the barrow, nor the message of Gandalf, but something seemed to be compelling him to disregard all warnings, and he longed to yield. Not with the hope of escape or of doing anything, either good or bad. He simply felt that he must take the ring and put it on his finger. He could not speak. He felt Sam looking at him, as if he knew that his master was in some great trouble, but he could not turn towards him. He shut his eyes and struggled for a while, but resistance became unbearable, and at last he slowly drew out the chain and slipped the ring on the forefinger of his left hand. Immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes, upon their gray hairs were helms of silver, and their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Desperate, he drew his own sword, and it seemed to him that it flickered red as if it was a firebrand. 2 of the figures halted. The third was taller than the others. His hair was long and gleaming, and his helm was a crown. In one hand he held a long sword, and in the other a knife. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. He sprang forward and bore down on Frodo. At that moment, Frodo threw himself forward on the ground, and he heard himself crying aloud, "Oh, Elbereth, Gilthoniel!" At the same time, he struck at the feet of his enemy. A shrill cry rang out in the night, and he felt a pain like a dart of poisoned ice pierce his left shoulder. Even as he swooned, he caught, as though a swirling mist, a glimpse of Strider leaping out of the darkness, with a flaming brand of wood in either hand. With a last effort, dropping his sword, Frodo slipped the ring from his finger and closed his right hand tight upon it. Ooh, and that is where we will leave off in a glorious cliffhanger. Okay. I was gonna try to keep it to one thing, because I have a habit of rambling a little bit. I might do too. So anyway, the one thing, oh boy, there is a lot of walking, which I remembered and I knew, because that is the song. They walk. I highly recommend, if you have not seen it, to look up Tom Cardy. It's Cardy with a C. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm gonna go watch it after this. You'll know it when you see it. But surprisingly, just kind of unnecessary amounts of detail. Like, it's cool to describe the environment. That's very evocative. I like that a lot. I don't mind seeing days of that. What's really interesting to me are the directions, the lefts, and the turning along like a specific. I think that I would not be surprised if I learned that Professor Tolkien had a habit of taking walks and writing what he saw. 'Cause that's what I would do. I've done it. I've absolutely done that before. Although usually one moment at a time. Not 7 days worth. Okay, here's a real quick too. I love at the end, Strider is literally fighting them with wood. With burning wood. I love that so much. I wish you could do that in D&D, but like the rules for improvised weapons are so bad. Pretty sure he is Tavern Brawler though. Yeah. God, I love that so much. I would love to encourage my players to do that more, but the rules are like, no. It's one of those things that just really, really, really tempts me to be like, you know what? Fuck your rules. Which I do a lot. I try to limit it to when it's really, really worth it. But damn. I would love to let them fight a wraith with 2 burning hunks of firewood. Ah, that would just be beautiful. That's why I love level 1 so much. Alright. Good night, anybody who is still here or catches up later. And we'll pick it up next time. Chapter 12. Flight to the Ford. In which I will probably just... This is one of the points they changed in the movies that I thought was actually a really a clever change and actually kind of an improvement. They have a different character basically help them out. I won't spoil it too much. Y'all know what's going on. This book is written coming up on 100-year anniversary. It'll only take about 15 more years before the set'll come out. And it's 100-year anniversary, and I will have to buy one. Because if you look in the picture, that's my copy. Shit, I have no idea when this was printed. I got it at Half Price Books. I've had other copies in the past, but this is the one that survived with me. Huh, 65. This is the 67th printing. November 1978. Wow. For real? Wow. Dang, these books have been read. They definitely have their Haggard. Kind of like them that way, though. Alright. That's enough rambling for me. I have to make myself go to bed and not cook breakfast because breakfast sounds so good right now, but we'll have something to look forward to in the morning. So good night, everybody.